So with these best and worst videos, I often cover franchises that have very different variations in quality throughout, with some extreme highs and some extreme lows. And today is no exception. Today, I'm going to be talking about all 5 Mission Impossible films going in order of release. Also, I will be talking about these films with full spoilers, so if you haven't seen some of these, you can skip around to each film as there are timestamps down in the description. Alright then, let's get into it. So let's start off with the 1996 classic Mission Impossible. This film was pretty huge when it came out, but I was not around to see that unfold back then, so I'm in a slightly unique position where I can sit here today and answer the question, does this film still hold up? And the answer is, yeah, it really does, in almost every way. It's not flawless, but still really great. The cast, for one, is pretty amazing. Tom Cruise was still an up-and-coming action star when this came out, and he's great here. One of his best performances in any action film. Ving Rhames is really funny in this. Jon Voight is really good. Pretty much everyone does a great job, even if a few performances are a bit over the top. The music is, of course, amazing and super iconic. Every time that classic Mission Impossible theme kicks in, I can't help but smile. The directing here is also really great. This was directed by Brian De Palma, who you'll know from stuff like Scarface and the original Carrie, and he brings a lot of really solid and unique stuff to this film in terms of how it's shot. The best example of this I can think of is when Ethan is talking to that CIA guy after his team has been murdered. That's another thing. This movie is full of twists and turns. And some of them, yeah, maybe you can see them coming, but the part where his entire crew dies in the first action scene, I did not see that coming. Through these twists, and also just the tension-filled scenes, which we'll get to later, the movie does a great job of building suspense throughout. It's probably the most suspenseful Mission Impossible movie. It's a kind of psychological thriller in a few parts, which I think is an interesting choice for this kind of fun summer action movie. The movie's well-paced, it doesn't go on for too long, it's funny sometimes, and really, it's just a lot of fun to watch. The classic Mission Impossible stuff in it, specifically that big famous Mission Impossible heist, is amazing. That scene is spectacular, and we'll get more into this later, but I love all this kind of undercover, secret mission, planning ahead, spy, gadget stuff. That kind of stuff does come more into play in later films, but it's still present here, and I really enjoyed it. The visual effects are also really great, especially for 1996, although some of those Mission Impossible masks look a little interesting these days. As far as what doesn't really work about this film, well, it came out in the mid-90s, so it is a little bit dated, especially in terms of the tech they use. The actual straight-ahead action, like fistfights and all that, there isn't a ton of it, but when it's there, it isn't particularly great, with the exception of some of the stunts and all the stuff on the train at the end, which is pretty great, both visual effects-wise and one-liner-wise.
Red light! Green light!
I don't really know if I can call this a problem with the film, and it's not really the movie's fault, but I think one of the downfalls of this film is the fact that it is the first Mission Impossible, and so it can't really Mission Impossible it up too much, with ridiculous Tom Cruise running, or totally insane fun gadgets and whatnot. My point is, I personally prefer the later films where the movies don't take themselves as seriously. That's just my preference. However, the relatively more serious take actually really works for what this movie wants to be. It doesn't feel annoyingly melodramatic or anything, and there are still a lot of cool spy action moments. In conclusion, Mission Impossible is a fun, tense, and exciting start to a franchise that still holds up today. Is it the best Mission Impossible? I wouldn't say so, but it's still a really entertaining film that, if you haven't seen it already, I think it's worth your time. I'll give Mission Impossible an 8.6 out of 10. Okay, now we've come to a really, really awful film that I kind of love. Mission Impossible 2 is so bad that I personally found it extremely hilarious. I had such a blast with this film. It's going for so much, and achieves so little in the process, besides being really damn funny to me. Okay, I'll be honest, while I'm writing this video, I have like 3 whole pages of notes for this film, and I legit do not know where to start. So let's just go in order of how this movie plays out for now. So there are quite a few times in this film where I burst out laughing, and the first one of these comes in the opening scene, where the bad guy, disguised as Tom Cruise, does this.
It seems we have a problem, Dimitri.
You keep calling me Dimitri. You really shouldn't.
You are not Dimitri.
I mean, that's just great on its own. For the record, the Limp Bizkit rock cover of the Mission Impossible theme made me laugh every time it played. It's so over-the-top trying to be hardcore that I kinda love it. Just from the first couple of scenes in this film, you can tell the writing is really bad and just super corny here. And the directing is not very good. Definitely not as good as the first film. I personally haven't seen any John Woo movies, but I know from pop culture and whatnot the tropes of a John Woo movie, and this entire movie is just the epitome of that. The film then cuts to the famous Tom Cruise is climbing a mountain because he's Tom Cruise scene. Here he gets a message delivered by sunglasses, which are delivered by a missile, which is delivered by a helicopter on top of this mountain. I know the Mission Impossible films are famous for kind of having ridiculous mission delivery systems, but this just doesn't make any sense. This film almost feels like a Mission Impossible parody in some ways.
If I let you know where I'm going, I won't be on holiday.
Another problem with this film that you'll notice early on is Ethan Hunt is not the same character as he was in the last film. And not in a sequel way where the character has progressed naturally into this better version from the last film. This is just weirdly not the same guy.
Do you mind if I'm on top?
Either way works for me.
What is this? It feels weirdly like they're trying to make Ethan Hunt James Bond in this, and it really doesn't work. Speaking of which, the cast is weird in this. Some of the performances are really cartoony and not very good. Tom Cruise really Tom Cruises it up in this film. He has great flowing hair, and no matter the situation, he's always smiling. The girl in this, Naya, she isn't awful. Anthony Hopkins isn't terrible. He's alright, besides this line.
Well, this is not mission difficult, Mr. Hunt. It's mission impossible.
Yeah, that's just cinematic gold right there. The villain, played by not Wolverine, is pretty bad, and there's this weird love triangle between him, Tom Cruise, and the main girl, which just does not need to be here. I do not come to a Mission Impossible film for love triangles. Also, something else I noticed, these characters are not only highly trained spies, but also just, adults. But sometimes in this film, they act how high schoolers would act in these situations. Ving Rhames and this Australian guy just kind of show up a third through the movie. Like Ethan Hunt, Luther doesn't really feel like the same character from the last film, besides the fact that he hacks stuff. Pretty much everything else in this movie misses the mark too. The editing is awful in this. Just look at this scene.
I wouldn't do that.
What?
That.
There are continuity errors, and the movie's plot is oftentimes confusing and doesn't make a ton of sense. The reason for this is that the original cut of this film was about an hour and a half longer and R-rated, so quite a bit of stuff was cut out of this. While some visual effects are okay, some visual effects are actually worse than the first film. That mask effect I noticed in particular is somehow worse than it was before. Also, can I just say, there are so many goddamn masks in this film. By the third one, I was ready to scream at my computer. The action here is really bad and does not hold up at all. Again, from what I know about him, it's all very John Woo-y. There's tons of slow motion and zoom pans and over-the-top sound effects and wielding two guns at once and packs of birds and all that. The hand-to-hand stuff is also really bad. It takes 8 cuts for one jump kick to happen. You gotta at least admire how much this film commits to being this ridiculous. The music, generally, is terrible in this. I mentioned the Limp Bizkit stuff before, and the rock MI theme. But when that's not playing, it's just the most generic, sitcom-esque music. As previously mentioned, the movie is just poorly written, and the actors cannot pull off some of this dialogue.
Damn, you're beautiful.
You turned around.
What are you gonna do? Spank me?
What am I even doing here? Also, when this movie is actually trying to be funny, it doesn't really work. The film's plot is also pretty bad. It's very predictable. For example, when Ethan and that one bad guy walk in, having never seen this part of the film, I was like, they're definitely 100% wearing masks here. Also, when he shoots the obviously not Ethan and that Battle Royale-ish music starts playing, there's nothing really left to say at this point. I will admit, the climax of this film, while equally as dumb as the rest of it, was still quite entertaining to me. A few of the gadgets, especially towards the end, were kinda cool. I do still have a soft spot for this spy gadget infiltration kind of stuff. Look, I could have honestly written another 10-minute piece on just how stupid this climax is, but I feel like I'd just be repeating myself. Either you've seen this film and you know how dumb it is, or you can assume based on what I've said so far and what you're seeing now that this climax is pretty stupid. To be honest, that final fight between Tom Cruise and Doug Ray Scott isn't that bad. It's very obviously choreographed, but it's the closest thing to an actual unironic good action scene in this film. I like the knife eye bit at the end. That was pretty good. How Doug Ray Scott dies at the end, again, it's stupid and pretty anticlimactic. And you know what? I'm done talking about this film. Look, I know this review was a bit all over the place, but so is this movie. Mission Impossible 2 is literally laughably bad. I had a great time with this film because it's so dumb. It thoroughly entertained me throughout. Still pretty terrible though. I'll give MI2 a 5 out of 10. So after Mission Impossible 2, Paramount I guess realized that the franchise needed a major shift in both tone and quality, and so J.J. Abrams was hired to do the third entry. And oh boy, did they shift in tone, because this is by far the darkest Mission Impossible film. Let me just say, this is how the last film opened. And this is how this film opens.
The only way you're gonna get what you want is for you to... You think I'm playing? You think I'm playing? You don't think I'll do it? Where is it? Where the hell is it? Look at me. Where the hell is it? Look at me. Stay with me. Seven! I'm gonna kill you. I swear to God, I'm gonna kill you.
Last film.
Come my way, soca soca na na. Come on, miss ale. With the soca soca mama.
This film.
No. No. 10.
But with that, this movie is pretty good. Not amazing, but solid. Firstly, the good. The cast this time around is great. Tom Cruise actually feels like Ethan Hunt again, and Ethan Hunt, once again, actually feels like a real person, which is nice. There's yet another disposable Mission Impossible team that's not going to stick around, but they're pretty good in this. Ving Rhames is once again pretty fun. Simon Pegg shows up for the first time in this series. He's there very briefly, but his part is quite funny. Michelle Monaghan is great as Ethan Hunt's wife. Lawrence Fishburne's good. Dr. Manhattan's good. Aaron Paul is in this briefly. But by far the stand-up performance in this is Philip Seymour Hoffman as the villain. The Mission Impossible films generally don't have great villains, but this is the one exception. Philip Seymour Hoffman is incredible in this role. Super intimidating, super frightening, just all-around awesome villain. That's the one thing I can say this film does better than any other Mission Impossible film. When he finally dies at the end, it is so satisfying. Like I said, this movie is much grittier and much more grounded than the other films in the series. Even down to the color palette and the way it's shot, it's very noticeably different. There are still some fun Mission Impossible-y moments, like the whole Vatican bit. That's pretty great. There are some cool action scenes, some great visual effects, and some good stunt work. In this movie, as opposed to the others, they actually try to give Ethan Hunt more of a character. Like in the first film, they kinda did some of that, but in 2, 4, and 5, even though I love 2 of those, you don't really know much about Ethan Hunt as a person for most of those. They try a tiny bit in 4, but really, he's just there to do stunts and say cool things and ride motorcycles. Here, they give him a wife and try to give him more of a personality, kind of, which I can appreciate. Even the good guys in this film do some dark, messed up things, which helps add to their characters a bit. However, now we're gonna get into the negatives, and really, the main one for me is that there isn't really anything special about this. It's just not super memorable. All I really remember is Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think maybe the biggest fault of this film is that while I do like the idea of these movies trying different sort of stuff to spice it up, this is not very Mission Impossible, and is more just a standard action movie. It's a cool action movie with some fun, gadgety moments, but there's nothing that really sticks out about it, especially in the sense of it being a Mission Impossible film. That's all I can really say. The movie's good, but besides the villain, there's really nothing that sticks out to me where I go, yeah, that's Mission Impossible 3. In conclusion, Mission Impossible 3 is definitely a step up in the franchise, and each time I watch it, I enjoy it. It's a good film, and it's definitely the darkest in the series. It's what the franchise needed after MI2. But for me personally, it has a few flaws, it's weirdly paced, and I find it very forgettable. I'll give Mission Impossible 3 a 7 out of 10. So now we've come to maybe my favorite spy movie, and just one of my favorite action movies of all time. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is awesome. Now before I jump into the real reasons that I think everyone can really enjoy this film also has a personal aspect of it for me. A few of you might know that in my spare time, I like to make little short action films with my friends and family, and this movie has inspired me in those little films that I make since I was like 11 years old, and I'm sure will continue to inspire me for as long as I make movies. And like I've said before, even in this video, I absolutely love all this spy, gadget, infiltration type stuff. Hell, when I was a little kid, I wrote books about spies who had crazy, obscure gadgets hidden in their everyday accessories, like a grappling hook in their neckties. Don't ask. And this film perfectly embodies that. So that's why I kind of love this movie on more than just it's a super fun movie level. Besides that though, this is also just a super fun movie. This was directed by Brad Bird, one of my favorite directors. His previous work includes The Incredibles and The Iron Giant, two of my favorite films. And after the darkness and grittiness of 3, he definitely managed to put the fun back in Mission Impossible, but in a good way. And unlike Mission Impossible 3, this film is super memorable, from the opening scene with the Dean Martin music, which I absolutely love, to the Kremlin infiltration, to the big stunts. Just everything about this stayed with me. This was a super fun, lighthearted action romp, but it also still managed to have stakes for most of it. The cast, once again, is great here. Cruise is of course great, Peg is of course great. There's another kind of disposable team, but this one is slightly less disposable than before. I like Paula Patton as Agent Carter, and over the years, since the Avengers came out, I've actually started becoming a really big fan of Jeremy Renner. He works extremely well as a supporting actor, and I've enjoyed him in pretty much everything I've seen him in, and he's great here. The music by Michael Giacchino's great, the film's really, really funny, it's well-paced and actually really fast-paced, there's never really any downtime in this film. It takes all the best elements from the other Mission Impossible films and blends them together. It has great stunts, fun moments, tense scenes, lots of Tom Cruise's beautiful hair and Tom Cruise's beautiful running. There are cool gadgets and disguises and gorgeous locations, just everything. But even with all that, it also still plays around with the Mission Impossible cliches a lot. And it was fun to see a Mission Impossible film where basically none of their tech works. The visual effects here are great, and there are super fun, great action sequences and set pieces. And of course, there's the big Burj Khalifa scene with the crazy Tom Cruise stunt. And yeah, even though I've seen it a dozen times, it's still amazing. It's some of the best movie stunt work ever. It's also just a fun and very tense scene, and all I can say is that I wish I'd seen it in IMAX back in the day. Also, while all of these films are kind of independent of each other and don't really tie in, with this one they do actually try to tie it together a bit with the whole Jeremy Renner and Tom Cruise's wife storyline, and also you get to see Michelle Monaghan at the end, and that was just a nice nod to the fans of the series. Now, as much as I love this film isn't perfect. It's close, especially for what this is, but there are a few issues. The main complaint I have with this, and the one that pretty much everyone has with this, is the villain is extremely forgettable. That's the one aspect of this movie that I feel really doesn't work. He's a very generic, replaceable villain, nothing compared to Philip Seymour Hoffman. Also, all the scenes that have to do with the villain's plan are a little bit dull and kind of take away from the rest of the film. To be fair, there's only like one of these scenes, but still. Also, while the movie does poke fun at a lot of Mission Impossible tropes and does new stuff with them, which is great, there are some Mission Impossible tropes that start getting quite repetitive when you watch these movies back to back. Also, I wouldn't say the movie peaks with the Dubai stuff, because I really enjoy the rest of the film, but I don't think there's anything as great after that scene. And while we're on that, while I love that last fight in the car park, I think it's fun and creative, it does get a little bit too ridiculous in how invincible these characters are. Like, putting aside this... yeah, you're definitely dead, but whatever. And even putting aside this... like, you're so dead, but fine. But, how does he survive this?
No! No!
And better yet, how does he survive this? Like, come on, I get that this film's ridiculous, but there's, a bit of a limit to that. However, still, overall, in case you couldn't tell at this point, I absolutely love this film. It's one of the most enjoyable action movies I've ever seen. It's filled with fun characters and crazy action sequences. It's just the perfect example of what kind of film you should make in this genre. I'll give Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol a 9.8 out of 10. So now we've finally come to Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. I did a review for this film when it came out, but after rewatching it a few times, I have pretty similar thoughts, but let's talk about it anyway. Can I just say, I think it's incredible that these films have been going for over 20 years now, and they're actually better than how they originally started. Like, is it just me, or is that kind of really impressive? Anyway, yeah, as previously mentioned, this movie's pretty awesome. As if it needs to be said, the cast is really good, all the returning cast members are great, especially Ving Rhames and Jeremy Renner together, who were surprisingly funny. Rebecca Ferguson is great in this. She really feels like an actual badass and not just some side character that they're unsuccessfully trying to force as, oh, she's this really cool person, look, she punched a guy, what a rebel. No, here, she's actually really cool. Alec Baldwin's in this, he's pretty solid, Simon Pegg is really funny again, and the villain is okay. He's better than the one in 4, at least he has some kind of character, but he's still a good ways off from Philip Seymour Hoffman. The movie's action and stunt work is amazing, as is to be expected from the franchise at this point. It opens with that big famous plane stunt, which is definitely the best stunt in the film, but again, like the Burj Khalifa scene, I don't really feel like it makes the rest of the film feel less good by comparison. There's also a great variety of action throughout, with heists and fistfights and car chases and shootouts. The action scenes are just amazing. I particularly love the opera fight, which is so much fun to watch play out, and the motorcycle chase is maybe the best motorcycle chase I've ever seen in a film. The heist is also classic Mission Impossible, it's super tense, and as I found out recently, a lot of fun to watch with a group of friends who have never seen it before. They were all just freaking out half the time. The action isn't as spy gadgety and as Mission Impossible-y as it was in Ghost Protocol, but it's still really well shot and a ton of fun to watch. Now, there are some things that I don't think are great about this film. For one, Ethan Hunt doesn't really feel like a real person anymore. He more just feels a bit like an action figure, which works for this movie, but I kinda wish we knew just a little bit more about him as a person. Also, this is a small thing, but the villain does that cliche villain thing where he shoots a nameless henchman for no reason. That was kinda dumb. The movie, like all Mission Impossible movies, has some plot holes, but some of them are very obvious. Like when this heist with the water and all that is going down, and they have to do all this stuff before Benji goes through security, and it ends up happening concurrently, so it's more tense. Why couldn't Benji just wait like 10 minutes before going in, so he'd be at no risk? You could say, oh, it's just a movie, it wouldn't be tense at all if they did that. But all the movie needed to do was have one extra line of dialogue where someone says, oh, and by the way, no one can enter the facility after 7 o'clock in the morning, or something to that effect. Just a quick thing that would force them to do it at the same time. Now just some quickfire things that I wasn't a huge fan of. The CGI in the film is generally really good, but sometimes it's not amazing. There's a car flip that's pretty bad. There's also a little bit of character drama that seems a bit forced, where characters just kind of start yelling at each other.
And if he is wrong, then we have Vienna all over again!
No, you don't know him. If he wants something to happen, there is no preventing it!
That's why we have to warn the British!
Maybe that's exactly what he wants us to do!
Are you listening to yourself?
She set us up, Ethan. No, she delivered a message.
She set us up!
The final scene with the Prime Minister is a bit predictable, in the sense that when I first saw it, I was again 100% sure that someone in this room was Tom Cruise with a mask on. The part where they put the villain in a literal glass box, that was kinda dumb, even for Mission Impossible. But in conclusion, Mission Impossible 5 is great. I don't think it's as great as 4, but it's about as good as a follow-up as I could hope for. If this is what this series is gonna be like going forward, then I'm totally on board. Cool spy stuff mixed with good characters and humor, count me in. I'll give Mission Impossible Rogue Nation a 9.3 out of 10. So those were my thoughts on the Mission Impossible films. Which of these is your favorite? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.